Hey guys, it's Pikachu. Today I'm going to be talking about the patch notes for the upcoming update for Arena of Valor. In this video, I'm not only going to summarize and tell you guys some key changes, but I'll also share my thoughts on them. First and foremost, there's going to be some map adjustments, specifically to the towers. So, according to the developers, they've decided to add the iron defense line on the abyssal lane, hoping to give more options for the early confrontation. The bot lane tower now will get tower protection, which I believe will make a big impact in the early game. It's going to be much easier for ADCs to play safer and give up some waves instead of having to risk their lives to clear the wave, knowing that there's a risk of being tower dived. This provides much needed stability in the early game, prevents already out of hand snowballing in AOV, and gives a much needed safety boost for marksmen. Additionally, this makes it a lot less punishing on supports who decide to roam, which makes a better game environment for both sides as you can abandon a troll ADC, because even if they die, it doesn't hurt the game as badly, or if a support abandons you when you're ADC, you have a much increased duration to farm safely and get your items for the mid game. In addition to this, AOV is going to introduce a new rune named Alchemy. Every 15 seconds, 1 stack of alchemy energy is gained, up to 3 stacks, and 25 gold coins are obtained when normal attacks or skills hit an enemy, hero, or tower, and 1 alchemy energy will be consumed. Up to 1,200 gold can be gained from this rune. In my opinion, it is quite easy to cash in the stacks from alchemy, so we can look at the best case scenario of the rate to see how long it would take to reach 1,200 gold. It would be 12 minutes if you perfectly cash in every stack without maxing out, for a total of cashing in 48 stacks. This enchantment, in my opinion, has tons of potential for heroes dependent on items for their power spikes. A really great example of this is Morin. Morin easily gets pressured early and literally has almost non-existent damage until he reaches 2.5 items. With Alchemy, you can recover better from being ganked in the early game and having waves denied. In my opinion, this is going to be a go-to replacement for heroes who previously ran instant revive enchantment in AOV rank matches, as unless you have a coordinated team, instant revives can easily have little impact. In addition to this, I'm happy to let you know that there will be enhanced penalties for trolls. In particular, for players that have been verified with match-breaking and malicious behavior, the new system will be added to remove that player's highest rank as well as their seal of kings. The system is built specifically for targeting high-tiered players that intentionally team up together to boost one or more players' tier and/or KD stats. Right now, after the patch, the penalties will be banning their accounts and also resetting the player's current tier to bronze 3, and they will be removed from rankings immediately. The player's highest ranked tier will also be reset to bronze 3, and all owned Seal of Kings will be reset to 0. Personally, I think that this is a great system that will force players to reconsider boosting or any kind of other activity that makes the game environment more unfair. So I'm personally very happy that AOV has decided to add stronger punishments for players who ruin the game. So now let's move on to talk about hero adjustments in the new patch. Starting off with Thorn Jungle gets a nice buff in the form of faster wave clear, and that's because purple bullets once again deal additional damage to monsters. Thorn's blue bullet was also buffed, being able to increase 100% damage per hero hit by the area damage, which could make a substantial difference in team fights if tanks decide to clump together. Overall, I think this is a good buff for AOV to make to bring more versatility to the marksman jungle role as a whole, and keeping Thorn relevant as one of the top ADC picks in the game while preventing him from being over-buffed. The second hero that we're going to talk about is Aoi, or as the game likes to pronounce it, Ahri. In all seriousness, Aoi gets a small adjustment from the developers. Aoi will now have reduced enhanced auto attack range by 0.5 meters, which means it's a tiny bit harder to close the distance between Aoi and the enemy hero after a swing, while receiving a slight buff to Aoi's attack damage scaling. The other change is if you hit your S1 on top of a hero target while you are swinging, instead of getting additional HP, you receive a shield. This seems to be a buff, especially early game, because the shield protects you from more damage than HP. Overall, the tweaks are still small, so it's difficult to judge at this time. The next hero we're going to talk about is Florentino. Florentino got several important changes and received what I believe is a pretty substantial buff from the developers. First off, Florentino flowers now last half a second longer. This is actually quite important in terms of reaching the third flower while Florentino is comboing. Second of all, now, each time Florentino strikes the enemy hero, his flower S1 cooldown is reduced by 1 second. Now, this is an incredible change, as it means Florentino can realistically drop flowers after flowers during teamfights, and makes it so that there's not a single hero in the game that can match Florentino's 1v1 potential in the Slayer lane. This also incredibly increases the full potential of Florentino's 1v3s, as Florentino now has the opportunity to ulti someone for CC immunity and chain flowers infinitely while remaining immune to all CC for 5 seconds. Good Florentinos can get around 3 rotations and 9 dashes of flowers during that time, not to mention the movement makes Florentino incredibly hard to lock down and navigate as a team. Because of all these factors, it's almost a guarantee that Desperate Jewel enchantment will be repeatedly procced. Desperate Jewel is notorious for being an enchantment with the best effects in the game, with a bonus of 15% pierce damage and healing, but extremely hard to activate. In response to all of these buffs, the developers thought that it would be balanced out by simply reducing the S2 per hit damage by 100, which is a literal joke. It really isn't fair at all to any other DS lane heroes, and bizarre to think why this would be a good idea. In fact, it's such a striking change that Florentino jungle might become meta as a counter to all warrior jungle heroes, including Lubu, Astrid, and Errol. I would expect Florentino to rise to SS tier as a hero and also become a terror once again. Now, the next hero we're going to talk about is Joker. Joker receives a slight but noticeable nerf in the new patch. Well, I guess it was a well-deserved nerf too. So, the slight slow effect from the empowered autos were removed, and also the percentage damage scaling per auto was nerfed, now capping out at 4% over the course of the game instead of the previous 7% over the course of the game. In-game, Joker will undoubtedly still win every trade against ADCs. However, the difference will be that it's going to be harder to finish ADCs off before they can try to escape after picking an unfavorable fight with Joker. Next up, we're going to talk about Malik. Malik gets a small buff, mainly a little to his damage, but a medium boost to his healing effect. This is mainly controlled by his new effect, inflicting people with an enchanted state. Essentially, hitting a person with anything puts them in an enchanted state for 6 seconds, and if you hit them with Clave, you gain the HP bonus. Basically, it makes interactions such as hitting enemy tanks with Clave while you are tanking for your team heal you for around 5 to 8% more than before, while dealing 5 to 8% bonus damage. This slight buff also makes Malik more viable in the top lane, as it makes trading against enemy heroes a little bit easier due to more damage and refund cooldown if S1 is cancelled. Now for the one that a lot of people are excited about, Lindis. So Lindis is basically getting a new ultimate. Lindis' new ultimate is a dash that grants one empowered auto attack, and when you dash, you use up all of your Phantom Mark stacks. These stacks are like bolts of bonus damage that deal around 25% the damage each of a normal Lindis auto attack, but reduced by half when hitting the same target. You can get these stacks by using your S1, killing minions just like Butterfly, or hitting an enemy hero 3 times. This isn't explicitly stated in the patch, but I think that that's how it actually works based on released footage from Garena. Overall, it definitely is quite the buff, making Lindis by far the most mobile marksman in the game. However, the dash isn't as OP as it could have been, purely because of the fact that Lindis' damage stacks are linked to it. Meaning, it's unlikely that you'll be able to save the dash to dodge an important enemy ability like Azuka Ultimate, but more be used to reposition to chase down targets more effectively. This is similar to the way that Thorn's S2 works. But because Lindis' damage remained relatively untouched, Lindis will still no doubt struggle to do meaningful damage towards tanks. Because of this, it remains to be seen if Lindis will ascend to the top of the priority list for junglers, or instead be elevated as a good jungler but still needs to be picked in favorable situations. Next up, we're going to talk about Scud. In this patch, Scud gets a series of noticeable buffs that pushes him more close to the ranks of Lubu and Errol when it comes to jungling. First off, his passive now scales well into the late game, granting him a total of 20% additional health, which is a sizable boost worth at least an additional gold value of 750 to 900 gold for free if you were to put the health increase in terms of items. Then, the slow that Scud applies is now set at a constant 50%, which allows early game ganks to be that much more deadly. But in return, the initial damage of the empowered auto attack is reduced by around 3 to 10% from early to late game. Also, and perhaps most importantly, Scud can now regen off of minions regardless of his ultimate cooldown at a higher rate, giving him the sustain needed to take a bunch of damage from ganks and recover in full health after a jungle clear. Now let's talk about Aram. Aram gets a small and overall nerf. In this small change, it's pretty impactful because of the substantial reduction in regen that Aram receives. Aram is no longer that effective or annoying of a frontliner. Usually, you have warriors or tanks hitting Aram while the ADCs are hitting Aram as well, so Aram could easily regen a huge portion of her health while frontlining for her team. Also, Aram could force early jungle invades and take advantage of her passive to be incredibly difficult to kill, thus hard for the enemies to defend against the early jungle invade. However, with these new changes in the next patch, her focus will then be to use her ultimate wisely while staying in bushes and at a further range instead of face tanking the enemies. In other words, Aram will be noticeably squishier, especially in the early game. Now let's talk about Crest. Crest gets a slight change that could have a sizable impact. This comes in the form of removing the rage bar from this hero. This is powerful not only from the aspect of no longer having to stack rage, thus much less likely to KSCS or idle time hitting jungle minions, and thus being more proactive on the map, but also, now enemies have no idea when Crest can or cannot ultimate. This makes it much easier for Crest to land key ultimates that stun opponents and force opponents to second guess chasing him. Due to this change, Crest should see a rise to the top of the supports in conjunction with the Tower Disrupt Summoner spell. Lastly, we'll talk about Astrid. So, Astrid received a significant amount of changes that has definitely increased her sustained damage potential. First of all, her S2 no longer resets her S1. Instead, her S2 is now a lunge that grants an empowered auto along with a shield and a slow. This empowered auto makes up for the lost damage of not having a reset on S1, while the slow is very noticeable and helps lock down targets easily after you've gotten close. This also gives her more control when it comes to fighting enemies, as oftentimes in groups, Astrid S1 will cause her to go different directions based on the enemy hero's HP. Next, her ultimate was reworked to have a slightly more damage aspect, especially against tanks. 100% lifesteal giving Astrid a chance to survive more after she ults, and the ability to use the S2 dash to reposition the ultimate to make sure it hits. This is definitely a big boost for Astrid in terms of granting a survivability boost. Lastly, her S1 effects got reworked to provoke extra armor pierce and attack speed if you can hit her S1 on multiple targets, giving her a slight buff during team fights. These changes are definitely extremely positive for Astrid and definitely makes her a stronger jungler, but in my opinion, not enough to make her a priority over heroes such as Lubu or Errol. However, it is clear that Astrid will have a noticeably better laning phase in the Slayer lane compared to before, which has been more commonly described as a hit-and-run style. Overall, Astrid will definitely become a high priority hero similar to Scud, but not on the levels of being extremely broken. So that concludes our discussion today on the patch notes for the new patch that will be updated in most servers within the next week. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any more questions about the new patch or about anything that we talked about in this video, feel free to ask me in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.